Well, Don, we're honored to have you as our guest in what we call our Lanyap series, a term I learned from our friends down at Marshall. I don't know if they still call their in-house publication the Lanyap, but it's spelled. It looks like it should be pronounced Langanippy. But when I met their editor, I said, "How do you pronounce that and why?" And he said, "Well, a lanyap is a little extra something that you get when you go down to the general store, with 50 cents to buy your mom a gallon of molasses." And you tell the guy, say, "Hey, I walked all this way barefoot to get my mama a jug of molasses. Where's my lanyap?" And that would be a little piece of candy, a little something extra. So this is our lanyap
Hmm.
for our viewers. Now we have with us today Don Thomas, who I guess we can say is an engineer, a NASA astronaut. We've been up what 4 times on the shuttle, and
Correct.
it was all ISS
They were
or
all before the ISS.
I'll be okay.
Yep.
So needless to say, you got some mileage. Some how many orbits? Do they still count orbits?
I count them. Nobody else does, maybe, but 692 orbits of the Earth and 44 days in space.
Yeah. Well, I think we're about the same age. I'm 66, so I grew up in the era of the moon program. So let me tell you, it's a great honor to have you here and in on our program. And we want to keep it somewhat submarine related, and everybody understands the dangers of being in space, and certainly the dangers of being in a submarine. Uh, there are a lot of similarities, and I want you to talk about that. But first, suffice to say, in one case, a submarine hull is keeping the pressure out, and in the case of the shuttle and the ISS, keeping the pressure in. So, if you could, I mean, you're not a submariner. Have you been on any submarines?
The USS Cod, and
Yes.
I've been on another submarine. I think one of the Trident class ones when it was at Cape Canaveral. I
Oh,
can't
yeah.
remember which one that was, but I
Well,
got a quick tour of that.
Yeah, so one that was more recently or still operational. There is a long tradition of linkage with submarines and space. It goes back to the fact that Max Faget, the engineer who designed Mercury, Gemini, he was a chief engineer for Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo, was himself a World War II submariner. Thomas Paine, the NASA administrator, during the moon landing, is a World War II submarine officer. My predecessor at the USS Cod, Dr. John Fakin, worked out at the lab, as they called it, NASA Lewis, back when it was NACA, and he was working there through the about 1971. So, and then became our director. So there's a connection, and the thing is, you have highly trained, very motivated people living in a very small, cramped environment. Tell us how that is. What's it like to be in space?
But on the space shuttle, our missions were only 16 days long, and 25 years ago, when I flew in space, that was a long time. Today, that's nothing. We have astronauts up on the International Space Station for 6 months to a year at a time. So my 16 days, that's my longest mission. That's nothing compared to what we do today. But inside, being in a small area there, and I tell people, the inside of the space shuttle is about the size of your kitchen at home. And that's where you'll have up to 7 astronauts, in that small volume, and you're eating, sleeping, the toilet, everything is in that one small area. So for me, there would be moments, days like, hey, I just want to get away from everybody. And what I would do when I just want to have some quiet time, I would put my face up against the window and just look out at planet Earth. And I might have people bumping into the back of me, behind me, but I was in my own little world. And that's a way that I could escape and put some music on and just look at the earth and have some quiet time. but we're in a small area. You're with a group of people that you've trained with for, 2 years or more. And you get to know these people like your family. I'm sure it's very much the same on a submarine. My life is dependent on them doing their job properly. Their life is dependent on me doing my job properly. And we all have to work together as a team and get along. We know each other's strengths. We know each other's weaknesses. We know how to make each other laugh, and we know how to push buttons if you want to annoy somebody. You know each other so well, just like a family. And that's how we, operate on the shuttle. Now, number one, the most important thing on the space shuttle and the space station as well is mission. Completing the mission is the top goal. It isn't my personal goals or my personal preferences. I'm part of this team, and we're all working together for the goals of the team. And I'm sure it's very much the same on a submarine.
Well, I'm going to right there. I'm going to ask Evan here. Now, Evan's been with the program for, oh my God, it's coming up on maybe 10 years. And I've been with Cod 48 years. And what you've just said, I have heard probably hundreds, if not thousands of times when I talk to submariners. So the only difference is you've got that beautiful embroidered logo of the ISS on your chest, where they might have been saying the very same thing with dolphins. Oh yeah, very good.
Or
Well, we got ours
or
up here. I hope my wife doesn't turn the fountain on, and then the cod will be submerging. We're on the lovely front Tuscan dining porch of my house, so I that's about as best as I could do for making it cod. So I just am really impressed by your models and everything. So let me ask you, when you're up in space and you're at that window, does everybody else in the crew know that this is Don's private time? Don't bug him. I mean, is that kind of like an accepted practice?
it would be unless there's something important. If there is some kind of an emergency or somebody needs something from me, and I'm the go-to person for
Yeah.
that, then they would know, yeah. But otherwise, if I've got nothing on my schedule, and this is a rare moment on board the space shuttle to have some free time like that. Typically during a 2-week mission, they would give you what NASA called a half a day off. In NASA language, that's 4 hours. I don't know how that is like a half a day, but they would give us a half a day, 4 hours off. And I would plant myself in front of the window and just watch sunrise, sunset. And again, if somebody needed something, it's okay, to interrupt me, bug me and say, hey, I need this from you, or do you know where this is? But otherwise, yeah,
Well,
people, you let them do their own thing up there.
given your orbital period is what, 90 minutes, the NASA could say half a day is 45 minutes,
That's true. That maybe they
and
were generous with me then.
yeah, and I guess that kind of comes out of the experience of Apollo 7 when you had the first Apollo mission, and we're testing out new hardware for the first time. We're in this big race to the moon, and poor Wally Schirra and Don Elsey, those guys were up there, and I guess the ground mission planners kept throwing tasks on top of tasks, and on top of that, those poor guys had
colds.
head
They were
colds,
sick.
sick, and I guess there was a little bit of a blowback. Was there ever any blowback on the shuttle, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, not. We had pretty good communication with them, and I think we've learned our lessons from what happened on Apollo 7 and one of the Skylab missions as well. So today, for our crews on the International Space Station, we know you can't work these astronauts when they're up there for 6 months or a year. You can't work them, 7 days a week like we do on the space shuttle. Space
Right.
shuttle's a short duration, 2 weeks. We called it a sprint. And the space station mission is more like a marathon. So you just can't work people that hard. So up on the space station, they give them the weekends essentially free. There's some tasks that they have to do. Maybe you have to, monitor some experiment or do a little bit of maintenance. But otherwise, they try to, give them like a peaceful weekend with lighter duty and give them maybe some voluntary, tasks here. If you want to do these, you can do them. If not, it's no big deal.
But since there is no equivalent to Muldoon's corner bar, window time is pretty much, I guess, is that the main distraction?
Window time, or there's books that they could read on, or listen to books on tape. They have, I'm sure, like a DVD collection up there, or digital, videos that they could watch. So there's a number of ways, astronauts have entertained themselves or relaxed. One of the astronauts grew up in Nantucket, and in Nantucket, they're famous for these baskets that they would weave there. And since he and his family were from Nantucket, he wanted to weave one of the famous Nantucket baskets up on the International Space Station. It's really a small, very labor intensive, but he took a little hobby along with him. Other astronauts maybe have tried to learn a new language, or if they like music, they've had guitars up there
I
and
was going to say our
keyboards.
Canadian friend, I
Chris
guess.
Hadfield was famous for that, and Sue Helms played the keyboards. She took a small keyboard up there. So there's whatever you like to do to unwind and relax. If you have any hobbies like that,
Now, I
before you
understand
fly on one of these missions, they suggest, hey, think about that, and we'll see if we can take something along.
what the heck would you bring, Evan? On submarines, particularly the missile subs, they have 80-day deterrent patrols where literally they are deep under the ocean, basically running big circles, 300-400 feet submerged, hiding away for 80 days. And so they'll have things like halfway nights where they'll have like a pizza party. They're halfway through their patrol. On ISS with various crew rotations and everything, I guess you don't. Do you have something similar to that halfway night where the crew will get a little crazy? The captain and the officers will serve pizza to the enlisted men. Maybe there's some crazy costumes. Maybe some. Well, I don't know if it's politically correct anywhere. Sometimes they would wear a dress. Somebody would wear a dress. Somebody who apparently didn't meet their qualification requirement or something. The little way of blowing off steam.
I haven't heard about that on the International Space Station, so I'm sure it's nothing too crazy, but they do mark special events like that. Maybe 100 days into your time up there, or maybe 100 days to go. They would have some kind of, they would mark it, if not a big celebration, just mark the event, and maybe you have some of your family members come into mission control, or friends would come in and do a special two-way video like we're doing here today.
Oh, speaking of pizza, I believe you were the first person to eat a pizza in space. Is that correct?
So I'm famous for a number of reasons. The most famous is because I took the first pizza in space.
Wait a minute, how can that be?
Yeah, how do we carry pizza? We don't have freeze-dried pizza, and this wasn't any contraband that I smuggled on board. We're allowed to carry a sandwich with us. What's that?
It's not the corned beef sandwich that.
Not the corned beef sandwich episode, but we're allowed to carry a sandwich with us, out to the launch pad on launch morning, because we may be out there for 5-6 hours, depending on weather and if there's any other delays. So they would always let us take a sandwich. And on my third mission, I asked, hey, instead of a turkey sandwich, can I get a slice of pizza? And NASA looked at it and they said, yeah, we can do that. So they had the crew quarters there at the Kennedy Space Center make me a little round personal pizza. So I had that with me. I didn't eat it on the launch pad. I waited till we got to orbit.
What was it? Pepperoni?
Pepperoni. Exactly right.
Of course.
But today on the space station, they send up supplies to make little pizzas for them. They don't have a pizza oven, but they can send up, the bread and fixings, and they'll have pizza nights. I've seen pictures of the crew kind of having a celebration, like you're saying. Everybody gets together, and maybe there's some special event up there.
I know on Cod, our one of our cooks, who was also the baker for all 7 patrols, introduced a lot of our crewmen to pizza for the first time. George Sacco. It's interesting. pizza was a very ethnic specialty that unless you lived in a big city where there are a lot of ethnic Italians, a lot of these guys never saw a pizza before the cod in World War II. And of course, now I think it's probably supplanted the hamburger and hot dog as our national food of choice. So
I think it is, and it's international. You go around the world and everybody has pizza.
now this is the time where Evan will do a shameless plug for your book. So to do a shameless plug.
Of
Yeah,
that way.
other way. Yeah. So it's a great book, Orbit of Discovery, and the All Ohio. Why was there an All Ohio crew? I mean, what was the genesis of that?
For decades, Ohio had more astronauts than any other state. And nobody knows why this is. I think it's related to having the Wright brothers, in Dayton, Ohio. And then for the shuttle era astronauts, the role models of John Glenn, Neil Armstrong, Jim Lovell, really motivated and inspired.
Boy, Parma, Ohio, and
Right.
let's not forget Gene Kranz, Toledo, Ohio.
Yep, I just saw him last week down in Columbus. They have at the State House, they unveiled a new portrait down there, a big painting honoring Ohioans in space, and Gene Kranz was a part of that as well.
I know they renamed the Toledo Airport, I guess, in his honor. And I had the great honor of meeting him in 2003 at the Centennial of Flight Gala here in Cleveland. So let me ask you, you're retired, so I'm hoping you can speak perhaps a little freely than if you were on the NASA payroll. What's up with NASA these days? We just had a significant delay in Artemis. The Chinese are dropping landers left and right. Our friends, the Japanese, sadly had a little mishap. They landed on the moon, and what are we doing?
Yeah, our Artemis program is still going and going strong. We launched Artemis 1 a little more than a year ago. Uncrewed, it orbited the moon for a few weeks. So we have our crew. Artemis 2 crew has been assigned. They're training. The mission slipped. It was supposed to be in November of this year. It slipped until 2025. I have not heard the exact reasons for that. I think some problems with the environmental system within the Orion capsule. And we just have to test this out and get it right before we send our crews on these missions. Artemis 2 is going to loop around the moon, not orbit the moon or land on the moon, but they'll loop around the backside of it. They're going to orbit the Earth in a high Earth orbit, going out to about 1,000 miles for a few weeks. And then they're going to fire their engines and then do one loop around the moon on that mission.
Yeah.
So they really hope to wring out all the systems, make sure the power, electrical, communication, life support systems, make sure it's all working functionally, at these long distances, far from Earth. And you'd want to do the same thing with a submarine. You're going to want to test it out to make sure that all the systems are working properly before you, put a crew on board and before you send them on an actual landing mission.
I guess the parallel here would be in World War II, Cod was built and in commission in under a year. And today, our modern nuclear submarines are 3-4 years in building and shakedown. Compare that, like I said, we put a man on the moon from John Glenn in '62, 3 orbits to Tranquility Base in 7 years, and it just seems that there's a whole different time frame today. It's a
different time frame, and one of the key factors is the budget. NASA used to get 5% of the federal budget, and today it's less than 0.5%. So the funding that NASA has to do, it has, a lot less funding than during the Apollo program, and that makes programs, slip out. You can't do it all in 1 year. You only have so much money, so we do it over multiple years.
Something that has benefited the country both from technology and prestige seems to get the shortest end of the stick, and every year they whittle it a little more. And that seems to be bipartisan. That's one of the few elements of bipartisanship in our government, both both parties seem to have a habit or a track record of cutting the budget. So
And you
it's a
mentioned,
shame.
China has an active space program. They have a space station with 3 of their taikonauts, and they regularly spend 6 months at a time up there. So China has committed to landing on the moon, sending astronauts there around 2030 is their target date. So I think that we could very well see another space race, not between the United States and the Soviet Union, but maybe a race between the United States and China, building a base down at the South Pole of the moon. So maybe that'll help motivate our politicians a little bit and get everybody back on board to supporting NASA.
So let me ask you, Don, what is the significance of a base on the south pole of the moon for those of us that aren't lunar geologists?
Yeah, well, South Pole, it's really a challenging place to try to land, much more difficult than around the equator that Apollo 11 landed back in 1969. But the South Pole is of interest because down there are some really deep craters that never see sunlight into the bottom of them. They're permanently in shadow. And we know in the bottom of some of those craters, there's water ice. This is from comets that bombarded the moon billions of years ago. That ice is still there. And so from this water ice, we can get drinking water. We can get hydrogen and oxygen. Oxygen for the astronauts, and hydrogen and oxygen are great rocket fuels. So this is an incredible resource down there. And so by going to the South Pole, building a base, kind of learning to live independent of Earth and taking advantage of these resources, it's a great stepping off for further exploration in the future, going to Mars, for example.
Well, we certainly have a step up on that technology. I know submarines take seawater and split the molecule. They take the oxygen and I think they burn the hydrogen. But in this case, in a lunar environment, you could use both. You need the oxygen and you could certainly use the hydrogen. Let me ask you, this is again, we're going to jump around a little bit here. Have you seen the movie ISS? And what are your thoughts?
I have not seen it yet. I think it just came out right in the last week or so, but I'm looking forward to seeing it. I'll tell you, most astronauts have a tough time with space movies
Oh,
because Hollywood tends to exaggerate and, change things a bit. My favorite space movie is Apollo 13.
oh yeah.
Ron Howard did that one. It's pretty accurate. There's a few, things that they exaggerated in there, but it's one of my favorites.
I
Other
mean,
movies like Gravity just drove me nuts. There are so many technical things that are wrong. They have George Clooney in a backpack just zipping around the sky, and in real life we would move maybe 1 inch, a second, and so just creeping around. So
couldn't
there's technical things that bother you, but the movies like Gravity was visually fantastic, but sometimes it just if you know too much about it, you're picking it
well,
apart.
like submarine, any submarine movies, with the exception of Das Boot for us. Yeah. So again, another big parallel there. So let me ask you, any weapons on the ISS?
We have a gun up there. Not a lot of people would know about that, but it's part of the Soyuz, the Russian space capsule called Soyuz, and part of the emergency equipment stored on board the capsule is a gun. Part of the use of the gun is a flare gun. There's cartridges for shooting flares up. It's also a gun to protect yourself. And the reason that we have this is on one of the early Soyuz missions. This is back in the mid 60s, even before Soyuz, maybe
I think it was Alexei
Vostok.
Leonov, the first
Yeah,
spacewalk.
they landed off target and they were in the middle of the Siberian forest and they had wolves howling around their capsule and they had to wait in there a day or two until rescue people came. So they decided, hey, we'll have a gun on board in case they have to shoot anything to eat or to protect themselves. So there is a gun up on the International Space Station. It's part of the Soyuz safety, rescue equipment. And again, you could put a flare gun in, a flare cartridge if you want to shoot off a flare, or you could use it as a normal gun.
There's a little bit of interesting trivia there. So one last thing that I guess we can talk about that's space related. Are we ever going to fly back from orbit?
Fly back like in the space shuttle? Fly back?
Yeah. I mean, splashdowns are so 1967.
Yeah, I think so. We're going to do that. There's um, one of the commercial companies, Sierra Nevada, has a Dream Chaser. It's a mini shuttle, and they're
I like
hoping
that.
to do commercial space tourism and maybe to send people up to space stations in the future with that. The problem with the space shuttle, it flew back, landed right precisely on our runway. It was an amazing vehicle, but it was pretty fragile. And we had two bad
Understood.
accidents with it. It's just inherently safer when you put your capsule or your shuttle, whatever, on top of the rocket, so that if you have a booster failure, some problem, you can release the capsule, the shuttle, the crew, and make sure they return safely. So that's the reason that we shifted from the shuttle to a capsule again, was for safety reasons after the last Columbia accident. But I hope we have shuttles again in the future. It was an amazing vehicle. I go down to the Air and Space Museum in Washington periodically. I only live an hour from there, and they have Space Shuttle Discovery on display that I flew on, and I marvel at it. It was an incredible vehicle, and we flew that one 39 times in the space.
I remember working at NASA in the early days of the shuttle program, and they were talking as hundreds of launches and a launch every week or every 2 weeks. And of course, we never were able to achieve that schedule. But still, the idea of coming back from orbit, dropping the ladder, walking down the stairway, saying, "Well, I'm home," rather than bobbing around the ocean, very delicate. And of course everybody remembers Gus Grissom and Liberty Bell 7. That's not without its own risks. But let me ask you too. I was 3 miles away from the shuttle launching. You were 180 feet away from the action. What was that like?
Yeah, so I've seen many launches from 3 miles away, and that's spectacular to see in the roar of the engines. But on my second mission, I was sitting up on the flight deck, and I had a mirror on my knee. And with that mirror, I could look out the overhead window, which was above my head, and I could look down in the flame pit, which was, like you said, maybe 150 feet away. So I'm watching the engines come up to full power. I'm watching the flame and the smoke just shooting out of the flame pit there. And I'm watching it from 150 feet away. I think my jaw dropped down and hit the floor when I saw that. It is such a spectacular sight, and you're so close to it. It's not a scary thing, but you are just so close. And to see the raw power of the flames and the smoke just billowing and shooting out with such speed and force, it was awesome to watch that.
Yeah, well, again, it was just an amazing experience, and I think if NASA wanted to improve their funding, maybe they should try to get every possible voter down for some type of a launch experience. You don't walk away thinking, well, that was nice. Let's cut the budget next year.
It's life-changing to watch a launch. And as soon as I launched on my first mission and I'm looking out the window at the Earth, one of my first thoughts is, I wish my mom could see this, my brothers, my sisters, my wife, my friends. I wish everybody could look out the window for 15 seconds, and it would forever change how you view our planet. And it would, I think, inspire a lot of people to take better care of this place.
Well, I think you can't find a better way to cap this off. Evan, anything you wanted to add?
No, no.
Okay. Don, thank you very much for joining us today. And I would like to extend my invitation when the weather gets a little better, because Cod is cold iron, and here we are in January. But this summer, come on down, bring your family, and we'd like to show you Cleveland's other gem. I'm going to include NASA Glenn as one of those, but USS Cod is right up there. So you've been to outer space, and we want to kind of reaffirm your connection with inner space.
And I've been on the Cod when I was a Cub Scout growing up in Cleveland. Our pack came down and we spent an afternoon crawling
Do we
through the
have those
Cod, which
valve
was
handles back that you and your pack associates took? Because I mean, they're all the Cub Scouts always take valve handles, and now we're 50 years later, we're trying to put them back. So if
yeah,
they're
I don't know
still in
about
your
that.
junk drawer, we want them back.
I'll take a look and see, but it's a great exhibit there.
Well, you
And
should see what we've done with it in the last 10, 20 years. I think you'll be, if you remember what it looked like when you were a Cub Scout, you'll be surprised at what my crew has done with her restoration wise. So.
And I promised Evan I would be there. We have an older dog right now that makes it difficult for me to travel, but when I do have the time, it's on my list, and I promised Evan, hey, I'm going to call him and get a tour.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Don.
Thank you, Don.
You're welcome. You guys have a great day here.
You too.